So the Spitfires have had a very interesting history with the Indian Air Force. And if you've studied any bit of Indian history, you would know that India had been a British colony for well over 200 years. Of course, the Indian Air Force was formed on 8th of October 1932, which is way before independence, because we got our independence in 1947. And that is when the British had finally left the Indian soil. But the Indian Air Force was formed with the first 6 Hawaii sepoys, and over the years it developed into a full-fledged Air Force. So by the time we became independent, as in when we were partitioned into the 2 countries, India and Pakistan, the Indian Air Force was a huge Air Force in itself. And it's no surprise that, fighters like the Spitfires and the Hurricanes came to us in a kind of an inheritance left behind by the British. Now, the Indian Air Force used many a version of the Spitfire, starting with the Mk.VIIIs, the Mk.VIIIs, the Mk.XIVs, the Mk.XVIs, and the Mk.XVIIIs, and even the Mk.24s. So this video currently is on the build of the Eduard 148th Spitfire Mk.VIII, and I have used this book, which is Spitfires in the Sun, written by Vikram Singh, a prominent military historian. So he's written this book. This is the definitive and the most trusted version of the Spitfires that served with the Indian Air Force. So if you have this book, you're a lucky one. If you don't, you better get your copy to know that, apart from Britain, the Spitfires also served in large numbers in the Indian Air Force. And similar was the case with the Hurricanes as well. In fact, we even ended up using the Spitfires and the Hurricanes in attack roles after the Second World War and just before our partition in 1947. And even during the first Battle of Kashmir, which was fought in 1948, soon after independence, the Spitfires and the Hurricanes played a very, very important role. Now, that's a different thing that the Spitfires stayed with the Indian Air Force for a very short time, span of just about 12 years. They were retired very soon, and the reason for that is because it became difficult to maintain the Spitfires, considering that the British had already left behind what they thought would be useless to carry back to their country. So, Swing Wing Singh is coming back to you with another build video of the Spitfire Mk.VIII. This is from Eduard's. So a very, very detailed kit. So stay tuned for the rest of the build. Enjoy. So as usual, I began the build of the cockpit by cutting off the parts of the sprues. This was a pretty simple process, and then I went ahead with cleanup of those parts. The cleaning up was an easy task because there's not much flash, and then I moved on to the very first step of photo etch. Now this photo etch fret is included with the Eduard kit. Now you can choose to leave the photo etch parts away and you can assemble the cockpit as is, but I decided to go ahead with the photo etch parts. Now the detail you see here is actually not photo etch, but these are the parts that are included on the kit sprues, and you can see that Eduard has made a lot of effort to put in all that detail. Furthermore, this detail is visible even more as you construct the rear and the front portion of the floor, and you can see how detailed that front portion looks. And then the assembly of the rest of the parts of the seat. Now the seat again has certain photo etch parts, especially this bulkhead portion. So I cut it off the photo etch sprue and assembled it as it was given in the instructions. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. All right, so then it was time to move to the photo etch parts, and this is the seat harness, and this is basically in 3 different parts. The first one is the left and right side lower harness, the second one is the middle harness, and the third one is the shoulder harness. So here you can see me attaching those photo etch parts, They looked pretty good here. Though in the instructions, it shows you that you need to assemble all three parts together. But I thought that from a ease of painting perspective, I only attached the side harnesses and left out the shoulder harness for later. All right, and it very quickly brought me to the phase where I needed to start painting the interiors, and here you can see me using Fevicryl Sap Green, and I'm spraying this at a pressure of 40 psi. I have already given it a coat of silver primer underneath just to show that metallic look underneath, and here you can see me using some acrylic markers to detail the oxygen cylinders and various other parts in different colors. Okay, and so continuing with the instrument panel, this is basically three parts. One is the overall bulkhead of the panel, the second one is the central part, and the third one is the photo etch. This photo etch is basically divided into two more parts. One is the semicircular part that constitutes the overall instrument panel, and the second one is a central portion in this piece. So basically it's a culmination of four different photo etch parts, and you can very well see how much detail that actually brings in to the instrument panel. Now, Eduard also gives you the option to construct the instrument panel with the decal available in the decal sheet, but in my opinion, that extra bit of effort in utilizing the photo etch parts has definitely brought out the look of the overall instrument panel. And then as a final step, this was the shoulder harness. So basically it comes with the pulley and lock mechanism, and basically it goes into that slot right behind the seat in the rear bulkhead, and it has to be glued on. This is the reason why I left this part out for later, because the shoulder harness is basically in a beige color, and I wanted to leave the color exactly beige as it was in the Spitfires. So I avoided the painting, but it ultimately looks the part when I constructed the entire rest of the cockpit parts together. And here you can see the final looks of that seat harness in the cockpit. Alright, so it was time to work on the wings and the fuselage then, and here you can see me cutting those parts from the sprues. And once the parts were cut out, I then went with a little bit of cleanup with my X-Acto knife. As mentioned earlier, there is hardly any flash, so the cleanup was a pretty easy task. And then I decided to paint the interior cockpit sidewalls and also the undercarriage panel that would be visible from the underside of the wing. And here you can see that I'm using Fevicryl Sap Green again. This is toned down with white to produce that light green in the cockpit. And once that dried up, I used a black acrylic wash to enhance the cockpit details. Now this part that you see here is basically a brace that actually forms the front bulk of the undercarriage gear bay, and this part, as per the instructions, needs to fit flush with the underside of the wing, but it was not very clear on whether the fit in my case is correct or not. So I had to confirm with another person who was actually building the same kit, and he told me that in the case of his kit, this part is absolutely straight and it fits perfectly on the wing. So I resorted to some warm water treatment to fix that slight angle which this brace has, and eventually after an hour of that warm water treatment, that brace did align correctly. And then I moved on to closing the two fuselage halves together, and you can see that there is a slight gap. In fact, there's quite a bit of gap here. This is not expected of Eduard, but I think it is because those side walls of the cockpit inside, they're pretty thick, and they would probably have to be sanded in order to fix properly. And here you can see that, you know, even the wing does not align with the fuselage correctly. I think all of that is because of the interior cockpit walls being very, very thick. So I had already glued them in, so there was no other way that I could actually fit it. I just tried with brute force, and that's how I was able to finally get it done. And I super glued the rest of the parts together. Here you can see me attaching the horizontal stabilizers. Now this comes in two different parts. Basically, you can position the horizontal stabilizers and also the vertical stabilizer in a downward position. That is when it is parked, but and that's a good thing that Eduard gives in this kit. You can actually position those control surfaces, but I resorted to keeping them straight. Moving on to the wingtips, Eduard instructions show only this triangular wingtip that needs to be fixed, and I had actually gone into a kind of shock when I realized that probably these are the only wingtips available. But then I looked at the sprues and I found the circular wingtips as well available on sprue F. This is not mentioned in the instructions, but definitely it was a sigh of relief to see a pair of circular wingtips also available. Next came the assembly of the air filter. Now there are two kinds of air filters included with the kit. I went ahead with the Abu Qir, or the tropical air filter, because that's the one that was used in Africa and India as well. Moving to the underwing radiator and oil filters, the instructions actually show that you need to construct all those parts together to form the entire radiator and filter assembly, and then put that assembly on top of the wing. But after a couple of tries of dry fitting, I realized that I would need the wing as a base to construct that radiator, since there are parts that need to go inside that assembly. So it would be better to have the wing as a base, or rather as a jig, to construct the rest of the air and oil filter assembly. And you can see that that decision paid off really well. I don't think it would have been possible to align them correctly if the wing wasn't used as a base. All right, and then because of those horrendous gaps, which was not really expected from an Eduard kit, maybe because of the cockpit, I then filled in those parts along the wing root and along the entire nose and fuselage seam lines, and then I fixed the rest of the parts like the radio mast and the door in the open position, and then masked off the undercarriage gear bays and made the aircraft ready for painting. Now the painting phase proceeded very quickly because I used a paint from a company called 4S. This is a spray paint, and I basically detailed the entire aircraft with that spray paint. I used 4S black paint to detail the propeller, or rather to paint the propeller, and then used a yellow paint pen, acrylic paint pen, to detail the tips of this propeller. And I had Humbrol 53 gunmetal gray, which I utilized to detail the exhaust nozzles and also the machine guns on the Spitfire. Finally, it was time for the decals and these walkway markings. I had to be extra careful and exercise a lot of patience and perseverance to get these walkway decals to align absolutely straight. This took me a while, at least 15 minutes with each decal, to ensure that it comes on really straight. Now the Southeast Asian camo roundel markings were available with the Eduard kit, so I utilized those. But for the serial number MV436 and the identification letter A, these were printed at home. And this is one of the silver Spitfires that was initially received from the Royal Air Force. And finally, from the book Spitfires in the Sun, this is Spitfire Mk.VIII, serial number MV436, based at Kolar, India, circa 1945. Now, this aircraft eventually went through a crash landing and it was written off, but this is how it was received directly from the Royal Air Force into the Indian Air Force in this overall silver or aluminum finish. Now, my 2 cents with the Eduard kit, it is definitely an amazing kit, lots and lots of details. It was enjoyable to construct the cockpit with all that photo etch included, and it definitely brought out and enhanced the looks of the cockpit. The overall finish of the model is also great with recessed panel lines and very, very nice panel details. You can definitely enhance them with a little bit of weathering. I left it clean because that is the way it was received and continued in service till it crash landed and was written off. My only qualm with this kit would be the thickness of the interiors of the cockpit that actually caused the exterior of the fuselage not to align correctly. I think now that you've seen that particular issue, I think whenever you're building this kit, you'll be more wary of that issue. But apart from that, it's beautiful. I loved building it, and I'm sure you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please click the thumbs up to consider subscribing to the channel. I'll see you again in the next video. Bye-bye. Take care.